Before he became synonymous with scandal and dark headlines, Chris Brown was just a kid from Tappahannock, a small town in Virginia where the sky seemed far too big for the ambitions of anyone born there. From an early age, music found him. He was only 6 years old when he would mimic Michael Jackson in the mirror, lost in the fantasy of one day being as big as his idols. His childhood, however, wasn't easy. Chris grew up witnessing what many try to hide: domestic violence. His stepfather, as he would later recount, was abusive toward his mother. The sound of screams, breaking objects, and silent tears shaped an invisible part of his personality. He learned to use singing and dancing as an escape, and that's exactly what saved him, at least for a while. At 13, his life took a turn. A producer discovered his talent during a casual visit to a store where Chris used to hum to himself. Before long, the teenager was in New York signing with Jive Records, the same label that launched Britney Spears and Justin Timberlake. His debut album, Chris Brown 2005, was an instant success. The single Run It shot to the top of the Billboard charts. He was only 16. His youthful, charismatic face graced magazine covers, and his electrifying dance moves turned him into a teen phenomenon. Crowds screamed his name, and the industry sold him as the new Prince of R&B. In interviews, he came across as respectful, still shy, but always smiling, as if the world was finally repaying him for everything he had endured. It was at this peak that Chris met Rihanna, another rising star. Together, they were the perfect couple in the eyes of the media: young, talented, beautiful. But the shine of fame is often a false reflection. Behind the scenes, mounting pressure and personal insecurities were quietly brewing a storm. And no one, not even Chris, seemed ready for what was coming. At that moment, Chris Brown was a symbol of success. But behind the stage, there was a past that had never fully healed. And as history would later show, what isn't healed comes back. It always comes back. The 2009 Grammy Awards were supposed to be one of the biggest nights of Chris Brown's career. Nominations, highly anticipated performances, and a legion of fans eagerly waiting for him and Rihanna, who was also a major highlight of the event. But before the spotlights could shine, darkness had already taken over. In the early hours of that February morning, the United States woke up to a jolt. An image of Rihanna, bruised, with a swollen face, split lips, and blackened eyes, was splashed across TV screens and front pages. Police had been called after an incident in a car, and Chris Brown's name emerged as the primary aggressor. That moment marked the beginning of perhaps his most silent and devastating internal battle. Chris, the teen idol, now had to look at himself as the villain. There was no escaping it. The brutality of his actions shocked the public, and shocked him too. "I'm not that monster," he would later say in interviews. But the facts spoke louder than any excuse. Soon came the public reckoning. The media descended on him like a storm. Radio stations stopped playing his songs. Sponsors pulled their deals. Industry peers, some with equally questionable pasts, condemned the assault harshly. For many who once idolized him, it was the end of innocence. Fans were divided. A large portion of the public condemned him without hesitation. Others, especially many young people, tried to understand, to forgive, or even to defend him. The conversation went far beyond celebrity gossip. In schools, homes, and newsrooms, people were talking about abuse, trauma, justice, and second chances. Everyone understood. The assault on Rihanna wasn't just a lover's quarrel. It was a symbol of something deeper and more sinister. In court, the legal proceedings moved quickly. Chris pled guilty. He was sentenced to 5 years of probation, 180 days of community service, and mandatory anger management rehabilitation. The judge was firm. You will have to rebuild yourself in the eyes of society. But the public scar is already there. Rihanna, meanwhile, vanished from the spotlight for a while. When she returned, stronger and more independent, she became a symbol of resilience. Chris, on the other hand, entered a confused spiral of reconstruction, marked by guilt, anger, and isolation. He tried to keep recording. He tried to apologize publicly. He tried to convince himself he could move forward. But the world didn't forget, and neither did he. Behind the attempts at redemption, something remained broken. The scandal wasn't just a single moment of violence. It was the shattering of an idol's image, the beginning of a long fall punctuated by more episodes of erratic behavior and conflict. Chris Brown was no longer the R&B prodigy. He was now the face of a nation wrestling with the question: how far does forgiveness go, and when should it be denied? The official punishment had been served. The sentence was completed. But Chris Brown's real sentence began outside the courtroom. In the wary eyes of the public, in the silent boycotts of the industry, and above all, in the ghosts he carried with him every time he stepped on stage. Right after the scandal, Chris tried to rewrite his story through work. In 2011, he released the album Fame, an acronym for Forgiving All My Enemies, a veiled cry for acceptance. The album was successful. It won a Grammy, but the award didn't erase the invisible judgment that followed him everywhere. Commercial success couldn't heal emotional failure. With every interview, every show, every public appearance, Chris seemed to walk on shards of glass. The slightest provocation led to an outburst. In 2012, he assaulted a photographer. In 2013, he got into a fight with Frank Ocean over a parking spot. On another occasion, he threw a chair through a window during a TV taping. It was as if rage lived just beneath his skin, always ready to erupt. While the industry struggled to process his continued presence, Chris racked up confrontations with other major music figures. He clashed with Drake in a feud that bordered on a street war, fueled by musical rivalries and rumors involving Rihanna. The two even faced off in a nightclub with broken bottles, blood, and chaos. The scene looked like something out of a mafia movie. What was supposed to be a redemption arc was turning into a new reputation. Unpredictable, dangerous, unhinged. And he knew it. In a rare moment of vulnerability, he posted on social media, "You hate me like I've never tried to change. Like I don't have a soul. But I'm tired. Exhausted." The public no longer knew whether to forgive him, fear him, or ignore him. Meanwhile, new problems kept surfacing. He was kicked out of rehab centers for violating internal rules. He was arrested in Washington after a fight with a fan who asked for a photo. Then, in 2014, he spent nearly 4 months in jail in Los Angeles for violating his probation. A once-awarded pop star, now behind bars. Still, his art persisted. He kept releasing music, videos, collaborating with other artists. He had more than enough talent. But critics no longer cared much about the tracks, only the police reports. Chris walked a tightrope between applause and cancellation, trying to balance the weight of the past with the desire to be accepted again. But his own instability turned every step into a risk. With each attempt to rise, another fall. With every album, another scandal. The music industry, sometimes hypocritical, continued to make space for him, but with caveats. Fans kept buying tickets, but with hesitation. He was still there, but never fully. A figure split between brilliance and chaos. Chris Brown was no longer a boy trying to be king. He was now a man trying to survive his own story. Unsure if there was still time to write a new ending, or if he was already forever chained to his first mistake. No matter how hard he tried, Chris Brown would never be able to bury his past. It lurked silent, patient, deadly. In 2024, what seemed like a year of comeback turned into a new battleground. Warner Brothers Discovery announced the release of a documentary that had been secretly in development for nearly 2 years. Shadows of Fame, the Chris Brown case. The goal: to revisit the artist's meteoric rise, his brutal fall after the assault on Rihanna, and the many episodes that followed. Interviews with journalists, psychologists, industry peers, and even former employees promised a complete and unfiltered look at one of R&B's most controversial public figures. Chris was not invited to participate, and that infuriated him. When the trailer dropped, the impact was immediate. Footage of a bloodied Rihanna, audio recordings of past rage outbursts, police files, untold stories. Everything came flooding back, as if no time had passed. As if all attempts at change had simply been ignored. Brown exploded on social media. "This documentary is a witch hunt. They want to bury me alive. This isn't justice. It's a lynching disguised as journalism." Warner's response was blunt. "Our commitment is to the truth. And the truth sometimes hurts." The documentary's premiere split the music world in two. Some colleagues, including former stage partners, fell silent, fearing backlash. Others supported the project, saying abusers should never be granted the luxury of forgetting. Longtime fans revolted, claiming he had paid for his mistakes. Others saw the film as a necessary reckoning. And at the center of it all was him, Chris Brown, reliving the worst moments of his life, now a character in a documentary over which he had no control. But the most devastating part wasn't the footage. It was the never-before-heard testimonies. An ex-girlfriend revealed patterns of psychological control. A former employee accused him of violent outbursts in the studio. A record executive said that, even in silence, many knew Chris was a volcano always ready to erupt. Brown didn't just watch his past, he was swallowed by it. Days later, he filed a lawsuit against Warner Bros. Discovery for defamation, misuse of image, and emotional damages. He claimed the producers manipulated facts, ignored his public statements of remorse, and used his name as bait for ratings. But even with the lawsuit underway, the damage was already done. The documentary didn't just reopen old wounds. It destroyed the scars. Chris withdrew from the media for weeks. Endorsement deals began to evaporate. Music collaborations were quietly canceled. On tour, some cities even canceled shows under public pressure. It was as if the documentary had hit rewind on his life. And everything was back to square one. In Chris Brown's life, mistakes never died. They just waited for the right moment to reopen the door. And now, with the world once again looking at him with judging eyes, the question came back strong. Does someone who destroyed their own image deserve to rebuild it? Or are some shadows simply forever? The year 2024 showed no mercy for Chris Brown. If the Warner Bros. Discovery documentary had reopened old wounds, his personal and professional life soon faced another storm. This time, on an international scale. During a European tour, Chris was blindsided by a serious assault accusation stemming from months earlier in London. The news exploded across global media. The star was detained on British soil, awaiting trial. Details of the case were scarce, but images of the singer being escorted by police, with a tense and somber expression, spread worldwide. The reality finally seemed to hit home. No matter where he was, his problems followed him. The consequences were immediate. Prosecutors, lawyers, and public relations teams sprang into action. He paid a hefty bail, but the impact on his career was devastating. Shows were canceled, sponsors backed out, and his music streams plummeted on digital platforms. But the arrest wasn't just a blow to his career. It was a warning, a sign that past and present were converging toward an inevitable collapse. For many, Chris Brown was no longer just a troubled artist. He was someone trapped in a never-ending cycle of self-destruction and violence. Among fans and critics, the debate reignited. How far can forgiveness go? Where is the line between second chances and accountability? Chris Brown became a living symbol of these tensions. Meanwhile, he seemed divided within himself. In rare statements, he spoke of remorse and the desire to change, but also revealed deep frustrations and exhaustion from the constant battle. Chris Brown's future was, and remains, uncertain. Will he find true redemption? Can he rebuild a solid career without sinking into new controversies? Or will his journey be forever marked by these shadows? For the public, all that remained was to watch. Some hoped for a miracle of transformation. Others awaited a final fall. And at the center of it all, Chris Brown continued his toughest fight, living with himself, caught between glory and personal demons, in a world that no longer forgives as easily as it once did.